digging down deeper on how like LeBron is kind of the central figure here that all things kind of springboard off of. Um, of course, you wouldn't have picked LeBron if he wasn't from Ohio, right? Because
Yeah,
there's that correlation there, right. So
yeah,
I'm curious because there's a certain type of there's a very unique type of affection that we have for athletes from our home states, from our home cities, right? Like Allen Iverson, like LeBron is my GOAT, but Allen Iverson is my favorite basketball player ever, and it's
absolutely.
solely
Yeah,
because he's from Virginia, right?
yep.
So you made it very clear how you revere Bron, you're in awe of him at times in this book, but I'm curious on to what would be you would say is your unique way that you feel about Bron that is distinct to you being from Ohio.
Well, the thing we saw him so much earlier than everybody else. People. I mean, before Akron St. Vincent St. Mary, before perhaps his junior year when they got big and the game started moving to bigger places, to see him in those first couple years, to see him as like a 14, 15-year-old, and to see him as a football player, like to see him, he was like an all-state wide receiver the one year he
Yeah.
played. You know what I mean? And to see that, there was like, it was this kind of feeling of we got to hear the album before the rest of the world did, you know what I mean? Or we got access to this brilliance before the rest of the world did. And that was I had never seen anything like that. I had never seen a phenomenon. Yes, Kenny Gregory was an all-star, but also Kenny Gregory played in an era before we knew what like national rankings were. There wasn't an industry around that. There wasn't an industry around putting these kids on the cover of magazines like Braun was on Sports Illustrated, that type of shit. And so to have the entire focus of a player be up in Akron specifically, which I think is an interesting city, an embattled city sometimes with a really rich history that sometimes I think people tend to affix a kind of deadness to it. Like this city was once great and now it's dead, which is not true, but that's how it be in these like factory towns or towns of industry that no longer rely on that industry. But to have that, to feel like Akron for a while was like the center of the world, even before the rest of the world turned towards it, that was cool. And to see that Akron St. Vincent team, that whole team was wild. You know, outside of, I mean, Ohio has had some great high school basketball teams. Those Brookhaven teams were great. The Jared Sullinger, Trey Burke, Northland team was great. But that Akron St. Vincent team that was like Braun and Romeo Travis and Drew Joyce and Sheon Cotton, that team was great. They had, I always forget this kid's name, but they had like one white kid who was exactly at what you would imagine. You know what I mean? It's like at that time, I feel like every white kid who was on one of these all black like super teams was like, that motherfucker's coming in to shoot threes and that is it. You know what I mean? Like that motherfucker's like, he is running from 3-point line to 3-point line. Yeah, that's like
Right.
that motherfucker shoot for real. I got to remember his name because someone else asked me about this. That motherfucker could shoot for real, for real. And he was maybe like the eighth, sixth or seventh best player on that team. You know what I mean? So to see a team like that too felt really, really miraculous. It felt like on some it felt like a very he got game kind of shit where it was like, the rail splitters in real life.
Mm.
I think we're all within like 2 years of age of each other, and Braun is kind of like in the middle there. The other thing that is so different now is you don't get famous in your town first anymore if you're an elite athlete. You get famous nationally sort of simultaneously, right? And that's changed quite a bit in my life as a sports writer. We used to get a year or two with kids where you could develop a relationship and see them grow into that, as opposed to John and Tyler and I have talked a lot about Mikey Williams in San Diego, which is like, hey, you're 15. Everyone in the country who's a basketball fan knows who you are. You now, instead of 2 ways to fuck up your life, here's 10 million ways you can fuck your life up. Like it's so different now. And you can't go watch YouTube videos of Braun the way that now, like a kid who's the 150th best player in the country has got 10,000 highlights of him. And so I think that's what was special about that too, is he's really the last athlete of his caliber who got to be locally famous, then regionally famous, and then to have word of him, like you said about 50 Cent, like kind of spread ahead of before you actually saw him and everything, before you followed him on Instagram or whatever else. So I think like that he's the end of this era, I think, in a lot of ways for that kind of athlete.
I sometimes think I had that. Maybe I had that experience with Austin Rivers to some degree. Not the same, certainly not the same. But I remember seeing the Austin Rivers high school mixtape and being like, "What the fuck is this?" You know what I mean? I mean, that is, though, to be fair, that's like a uniquely elite high school. His mixtape is like, unique in that era of like, him and, but even that,
John
I
Wall
feel like,
had a heater too.
yeah. I mean, that John Wall mixtape, it's like, but even those guys they weren't on my radar in the same way. It was kind of just like, oh, cool. You know what I mean? Like a high school star going to like a big college, that's kind of the vibe now where it's like, you can watch these tapes and that's it, and for LeBron, it was like a whole thing. The Hummer thing was big, and to see that on the ground in Ohio was interesting because that came, I mean, there was a lot of, this isn't surprising, but there was a lot of racism around LeBron by the time he was a senior. You know what I mean? Like a lot because Akron St. Vincent, because of the region and the conference they played in, because of the division they were playing in Ohio, they was just smoking a lot of white schools from like a lot of rural areas. They was beating the fuck out of these schools. And a lot of parents and a lot of like fans of these schools were tired of seeing it happen. And when that Hummer shit jumped off and when the Jersey shit jumped off, it was a real opportunity to kind of be like, oh, he's always what we thought he was. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And so I think about that a lot. I never felt when Bron left Cleveland, when Bron left the Cavs to go to Miami, I feel like what people don't remember about that time is, the Cavs lost that Celtics series and Cavs fans were talking wild. Cavs fans were on some shit where it's like, oh, he can go. We don't need him. We don't, you know what I mean? It was on that type of shit until he was like, all right, I'm probably going to go. And then it's like, whoa, we didn't really mean it.
Burning jerseys, and, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They were thinking in the Comic Sans font. Yeah, for sure.
It's wild. And I think about, I have a lot of grace for LeBron in a way because I feel like Ohio has been at times really hostile to him. Like when he was a high school student, it was really hostile to him. It was really hostile to him after that Celtics series. And to me, it made sense for him to leave for a little bit. And now they'll never be hostile to him again. I mean, 2016 cemented it. That's like a legacy defining thing. You don't, but before that, I thought he was met with a lot of unfairness in some realms of his life here.
Can we pause and just appreciate, because I had not thought about it in probably a decade until reading the passage in your book. Is there a funnier controversy than the Hummer loan? Like Gloria James took out a $50,000 loan or whatever it was against her son's future earnings, which are now, in the multiple billions of dollars.
Yeah. He has $1 billion contract with Nike alone, lifetime contract.
But at the time, that shit was on Sports Center. That was like an H2.
And what you said was it's $50K. Like I remember when it was talked about. I wasn't rich enough to even know how much an H2 cost. I thought it was $100,000 car. I thought, what I'm saying, it might as well be a Lamborghini the way motherfuckers was talking about this shit. You know what I'm saying?
It's also a very strange car for a high schooler to have. Like that was, I think the funny thing for me was that he was like pulling up to school in this large, unwieldy war machine almost. But
the same car that 50 had in the Wankster video. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's so strange. I mean, like that, it's a sign of the times for real. Like every, people in my hood were getting H2. So it was like a sign of the era. But it's so funny to think of the paltry amount of money it was. And also, if that were to happen today, no one would even, with the NIL shit, even before the NIL shit, I feel like no one would even blink an eye. You know what I mean?
Mikey Williams.
$50,000 car, bro. Like,
yeah. Mikey Williams drove, like, I think in 10th grade, a Lamborghini truck. He had a baby blue Lamborghini truck, bro. Wouldn't nobody trip off no damn H2. You know what I mean? So for sure.
Bro,
But
there's two things I always think about when I think about the H2. It's of course the LeBron scandal and the only Tony Yayo bars that I ever really liked, where he said, "I'm blowing H2O in the H2 with a project chick named Rachel." That shit was so hard, bro. Only hard shit Tony Yayo ever said. That's tough.
Hey, that's elite. You know what? Tony Yayo. Okay, so like Tony Yayo's not good, but
okay, I'm finna say. I thought you were about to say he was. I'm like, let's not lie.
He's a great hype man. I've always said the best shit. I've always said the best shit Tony Yayo has ever said on record is yelling Lloyd Banks when Banks is spazzing. Like that's his contribution. Great hype man.
The thrill and excitement of March Mania is here, and DraftKings Sportsbook, one of America's top-rated sportsbooks apps, is giving new customers a shot to turn $5 into $150 instantly in bonus bets with any college basketball bet.
The men's tournament is a blast every year, but I'm hyped for the women's tourney too. Got to tap in to see Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, and Juju Watkins. North Carolina listeners, don't forget DraftKings Sportsbook is now live in your state.
Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code Jenkins. New customers can bet $5 to get $150 instantly in bonus bets only at DraftKings Sportsbook. with code Jenkins. The crown is yours.